It's no secret that we love Voltron Legendary Defender, the Netflix series, and we reviewed it when it first started. I think we were maybe 4 seasons in when we did the review, and we recommended the series to our subscribers. And now the series has ended. Season 8 just came out. It was the final season, and it's over. And we thought we'd come back and revisit it and talk about where it went from the last time we talked about it with you, and what our thoughts were on the series as a whole. So let's look at season 8 for a minute, the final season. We just finished it last night. What do you think overall?
I loved it. Not as much as I did the other seasons, but I did like it. I thought there were some down parts, or like darker parts.
Right.
But then there were those little scenes where they put little funny things in them to kind of lift it up, which kind of worked. I loved Alora in this one.
Right. She
Unfortunately.
Really comes. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't want to give any spoilers away. But yes, Alora definitely comes front and center in this season, more so than the other characters. Previous season might have been more about, season 7 I think was more about Keith in some ways, in his story with his Galra lineage and what have you. So yes, you're right. This definitely goes darker, it goes heavier, but as you said, they do put humorous things in here and there to keep the mood lighter, which is important. I do think that they were able to successfully amp up the storytelling, the stakes, and the outcomes each season as it went. Like I said when we reviewed this the first time, when we were about 4 seasons in, I'm like, I don't know how they're going to top. Every season ends, and I'm like, how are they going to top this next season? And they always find a way. And I think they were able to do that all the way through. And that makes me feel like, and I think I saw something that would actually give evidence to this. I feel like they had the story arc and the storyline sort of mapped out from the beginning. So they knew where they were going. And this is why this is successful. Other than like Star Wars, where the sequel trilogy, they've said, well, you know, they're all writing their own thing and they didn't really have it mapped out. And I think that's where they ran into trouble. And I saw something where they interviewed some of the voice actors, the voice talent for Voltron. And this was a couple years ago. And they said they were all done with, they'd already done all their stuff. They'd already done all their dialogue. And so the animation was still being done. So I feel like that is true, that they had this all mapped out. And this went in places that I never thought it was going to go. I mean, they took the story in directions that I really didn't think they were going to go, and they did it, and they did it well, to my way of thinking. And gee, I couldn't wait to get to the next episode. I mean, we poured through this because the anticipation of what was going to happen, because they left you with a cliffhanger each episode.
I know, I hate that. All of my teachers do that with books.
Right. Well, and they do that to keep you coming back, right? So, who was your favorite character in this season?
Probably Alora, and I don't know, because I really loved them all. Probably Hunk, though. Hunk was pretty funny.
Right. Overall, through the entire series, who was your favorite character?
Definitely Alora, Hunk, and Lance, because Lance was very funny.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me talk about it in terms of a couple other things real quick, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but there's a TV show called The Musketeers that the BBC put out, and it's the Three Musketeers. Now, I'm a huge Three Musketeers fan. I've seen every movie that they ever did. The only reason I'm talking about this is that show ran for 3 seasons. And in those 3 seasons, they had 3 different villains, because at the culmination of the season, they never knew if they were going to be renewed or not. So they would have to come to a satisfying ending for the audience. So they would have to bring in another villain. And every time I thought, you're never going to top. When they brought in season 2 and they had a new villain, I thought, you're never going to top Peter Capaldi as Cardinal Richelieu from season 1. And they did. And then season 3 came in and I thought, oh, you're never going to top the villain from season 2. And they did. Voltron does something similar. We get all 3 villains. We get Zarkon in the first third of the series. We get Lotor in the middle third of the series. And then we get Hagar, or Omnerva, as she's also called, in the last third of the series. And each villain is good and strong and powerful in their own way, not just as a character, but as a storytelling device. So Zarkon was more like Darth Vader, whereas Lotor was more like Grand Admiral Thrawn, which is a character from the extended Star Wars universe that you don't know, but some of the viewers might. Omnerva was a whole different, even though she'd been there as Hagar the entire time and she was contributing to the storyline, she comes into her own in this last third of the story.
Yes, because she was very like, she used her powers a lot, but you could barely even see her face except at the end, and she was very like inside.
Yep, and in this last third of the story, so the last 3 seasons, they really fleshed out who she was, where she came from, and that's something that this show does much better than its the original material, the Voltron Defender of the Universe, which I loved, but it didn't have the depth that this story does. I mean, every week there would be a Roe Beast that would come, and Voltron would just defeat the Roe Beast, and that would, that was the story, and they were one-offs. This one, we find out why there are Roe Beasts, where they come from. There's definitely a huge backstory to that. It fleshes out things in so many ways, and they do a nice call out to the original show, because when our heroes from Legendary Defender are back home on Earth, there's been a television show that the Earth people have developed to celebrate Voltron, and that shows Voltron Defender of the Universe, because even Pidge is looking at, she goes, "Oh, tell me I don't really sound like that," and it's the original Voltron. So it was a nice shout out to that. So I thought the villains were handled well. When there's an ending in this, though, so when a character meets an ending in this, it's an ending. That's it. They're done. And while they may be shown in flashbacks or in a different style, for a cartoon and for a kid's cartoon, they don't cheapen the storytelling by giving them a way out. You know what I mean? So when it's an ending, it's an ending. So I thought a lot of things were really done well with this series, and the writing, first and foremost, was strong, and that made a huge difference. And the characters. Now, you said like Hunk and Allura were your favorites, and Lance, because they were funny.
Yes.
Now, part of the reason you weren't as high on season 8 as far as having fun is you said Lance
kind of wasn't that much funny.
He wasn't funny anymore. And that's an important thing to notice, because Lance's character, all the characters grow. There's a huge amount of growth in all the characters. You see it probably the most in Lance. He becomes less and less funny, more and more serious. He and Allura definitely develop a relationship, and there's a strong base for that relationship. And by the end, he's become very comfortable with who he is. He doesn't try to show off anymore. And his friendship with Keith actually shows a lot of that maturity too. So the characters all grow, and especially in that last couple scenes in the last episode, you can really see how much they've matured. But it wasn't like just all at once. It was definitely a nice slow arc for all the characters. They definitely grow and change. So I understand why you're saying Lance isn't as funny. But did you still like his character?
Yes.
Yeah. What else? What else about it did you like?
I liked all of it, but there was one thing that bothered me.
Okay, and I bet I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
Shiro's arm. I don't know if you can kind of see it in there, but he has that little thing, and there's a blue light, but this part of his arm is gone, and then there's just this part, and it's not connected to this.
Right.
It's
So
very...
So in the earlier seasons, he has the artificial arm, but that's part of the Galra technology, and he loses that, and then they come up with this, and there's that gap. And I gotta say, it bothered me too, because it didn't look proportional or something. It was just always awkward. It was like, well, why didn't they fill this in? And they were trying for something different, but it is distracting. I found it distracting as well. So I agree with you there.
It also looks a lot bigger than his other arm.
Right. Well,
Which doesn't bother me that much, It's mostly the gap.
Right. And Keith's hair seemed to bother you a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe he needed a hair clip to put his hair back occasionally. No, you would constantly say Keith needs a haircut, and I will agree with you again that lock of hair was always in his eyes, and I actually was like, brush the hair out of your eyes, brush the hair out of your eyes, because that's what you would do. If the hair was in your eyes, I would think I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I would think you would want to brush it away. I'm going to mention this too, and I know I always bring things back to Star Wars, but when we first introduced this show or suggested this show, it was because it is epic in its storytelling. In the last season, it does not disappoint in the level of how epic it is. It is epic in its last season. I suggested that it really is what Star Wars fans would have wanted. This is the reboot, or this is the continuation of the story that Star Wars fans, I think, really wanted for Star Wars. It's very interesting to me because recently it has come out what George Lucas's plans were for the sequel trilogy, and he talked about this microverse. You know how they talked about the midichlorians and everything in the prequels, and nobody really, a lot of people don't care for that. Whatever you think is whatever you think, but he was going to take in the sequel trilogy a look at the microverse down to a level of where the midichlorians were and everything else, and you wonder about that. And yet there's an element in Voltron where they sort of go into basically what I would consider a microverse, because they're in Omnerva's mind.
Yes.
And it works. It's written well. It works. It didn't bother me at all. So I have to wonder, maybe, George Lucas had this idea, and when you see it on paper and you read it and you go, oh my goodness, that in a sense is done in season 8 of Voltron, and it's done successfully, and it's done very well. There's elements in here too of like Babylon 5 with the Coalition. It's a show that you're not familiar with, but Babylon 5 brought together all these different alien races to fight a common foe, and that's done really well in Voltron.
Yes.
I mean, they bring the Coalition in, and that's all these different elements of things that fans have enjoyed about different movies or different shows throughout the years. Voltron was sort of able to incorporate all these different pieces and parts that we love so much about different shows, and it did it well, and they wrote it well, and I think it was...
And then there was some of those little pieces that were kind of like itself, too.
Right, and that are strictly Voltron. And, even there's another callback to the original Voltron, because the original Voltron, there were 3 different shows. One show was the Lions, the 5 lions, which come together to form Voltron. Then there was another one, and these came out of Japan. And it was brought here, and they called it Vehicle Voltron here, where it was from the Earth built several ships. There was a land force, a sea force, and an air force, 5 vehicles for each. And those 15 vehicles would come together and form what they called Vehicle Voltron. So it was a second Voltron. And in essence, that's what we get here, because Earth builds the Atlas, which is the ship that replaces the Castle of Lions, because that's destroyed. And that ship comes out, and the Atlas can actually transform into a Voltron-style robot. And so that's sort of celebrating the Vehicle Voltron, which was less popular in America, but it was still out there. I remember it, and I liked it. Although I always wondered, with 15 vehicles, what if one vehicle gets destroyed? Now, that's a lot more vehicles to go out there fighting individually, and what if something happens to one? You can no longer form Voltron. But it's done well here. And that's sort of celebrating that from the Earth side, bringing that Voltron out. So they even incorporated that, and they did it well. There was a reason for it. It wasn't just done as a fan service, and it served a purpose to the plot, and a very strong one at that. So, other than Shiro's arm and Keith needing a haircut, anything you didn't like?
No, not really.
Would you recommend this?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is, for my money, one of the best storylines over that many seasons, where it wasn't efforted. They didn't. I mentioned Babylon 5 earlier, and the first 4 seasons of that were, especially seasons 3 and 4, were so strong. And they came back for a 5th season. Now, they didn't know that was going to happen. They thought it was all over, so Michael Straczynski, who wrote it, had to sum it all up with season 4, because they didn't know if they were going to get renewed. So then they came back with season 5, and season 5 really wasn't as strong. we didn't have that problem here with Voltron. I thought it built because they mapped this out ahead of time and they were commissioned for that many seasons and knew they had all 8 seasons to tell the story. They did it and they built the arc and it became epic.
Yes.
By the end of it, it was like, you didn't really know exactly what was going to happen. I had some idea what might happen. Some things I thought were going to happen did, other things didn't. But they held strong with what they wanted to do and how they told it. So, any other thoughts? Yummy or crummy for you?
Yummy.
Yummy. Absolutely yummy for me. If you haven't seen it, start at the beginning and watch. You'll binge it all the way through, I have no doubt. But it definitely ended with the promise that it started with. And I think it was, this is how a reboot or a remounting should be done if you're going to do it.